First of all, we would like to thank you for your interest in the history of the Crimean Tatar people and thank all our friends and subscribers for this opportunity to address you today. We are Zera and Zarema. We are representative of the Muslim people of Ukraine, Crimean Tatars. Crimean Tatars are indigenous people of Crimea. Crimean Tatars were formed on the peninsula from all the peoples who lived in Crimea before the 14th century. The Crimean Tatars are people with a rich history, cultural heritage and deep roots on the Crimean Peninsula. Every Crimean Tatar is a living historical document reflecting the multifaceted heritage of the Crimea. Crimean Tatars' blood carries traces of Scythians, Goths, Taurians, Greeks, Italians, Seljuks, Polovtsians, Pechenegs and many other peoples who have left their mark on this land. This unique culture symbiosis not only makes Crimean Tatars the heirs of history, but also the custodians of multifaceted legacy they proudly pass down to future generations. Crimean Tatars had their own independent state for 3.5 centuries until the first occupation of Crimea by Russian Empire in 1783. From this period, Russia began to destroy everything what remained of Muslims in Crimea. The main goal of the Russian government is to make life unbearable for the Crimean people on the peninsula. Using brutal terror, the occupiers forced the indigenous population to emigrate, systematically and methodically destroyed architectural buildings, schools, mosques, literature, even tombstones in Crimea. In 1917, the autonomy of the Crimean Tatars was established, but a month later, Bolshevik persecution led to a devastating loss of their intelligentsia. In 1928, a tragic event repeated: families were forcibly dispossessed, some executed, and 30,000 Crimean Tatar intelligence members were killed or expelled. Then, in 1938, again, the Soviet regime eradicated all remaining Crimean Tatar intelligentsia. In 1944, another 46% the Crimean population was killed as a result of the genocidal deportation from Crimea. And the Crimean Tatar were not allowed to return to their homeland for about 50 years, until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. 3 times the Crimean Tatars are again starting to live from scratch. The first time Crimean Tatars returned to their homeland after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The second time was due to the occupation of Crimea by Russia in 2014 due to severe bullying, discrimination and hatred from Russians in Crimea on ethnic and religious grounds. And for the third time, the Crimean Tatar were forced to move due to the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Today, Russia continues to destroy the Muslims of Crimea and ethnic Ukrainian people in Crimea, taking away the homes and lives of the Crimean Tatars, and at the same time Russians are populating our homeland with ethnic Russians, hoping to make Crimea Russian. The persecution of the Crimean Tatars began almost immediately after the Russian invasion of Crimea in 2014. Activists and protesters were harassed, threatened and imprisoned for 15-20 years, and in some cases even kidnapped in broad daylight. One of the symbols of what is happening in Crimea is the sentence to the first deputy chairman of the Majlis of the Crimean Tatar people, Nariman Jalal. At the inaugural summit of the Crimean platform, he told the participants of the summit what it feels like to live for years surrounded by Russian propaganda and under the constant threat of persecution and repression. Nariman was only one who came from Crimea to openly participate in the Crimean Platform Summit, and he is paying a very high price for this: 17 years in prison. This is the sentence passed on him by the Russian occupation court. Russia falsified charges and imprisoned him for 17 years. His 3 young children were left like thousands of other fatherless children in Crimea. For intimidation of the Muslim people of Crimea in the first days of Russian occupation, the mutilated body of Rishat Ametov, a Crimean Tatar who was abducted while peacefully demonstrating against the Russian occupation, was found outside Simferopol. He was buried on March 18. The same day, Putin triumphantly announced the annexion of Crimea to Russia, even as he falsely promised to protect all ethnic groups on the peninsula. Ametov's murder sent shockwaves through the Crimean Tatar people. This is when Crimean Tatar became really frightened of what was to come, as people of Crimea realized that the indigenous people had lost all of their rights and were completely vulnerable and unprotected.
As another example, Russian law states 15 years in prison for reading Muslim literature and anti-government views, making dissent in Crimea even more dangerous. Now they're very similar to Auschwitz, this genocide taking place in Crimea.
There are real ethnic purges going on in Crimea under their occupation. Muslims in Crimea are locked up.
We hope that the law will prevail on our land, not brute force. We hope that all of you will join together in supporting Ukraine, supporting us. As the Crimean Tatar leader Mustafa Jamil says, the reign of jackals lasts until the lions wake up and stand up.